we have this wonderful way of touching people around the world and videos, and I know what you provide on a documentary is a mixture of it's a mixture of everything that you are, David. You've got everything in there from the science and cutting edge stuff and ancient philosophy, ancient history. I love the presentations that you do. I love the documentaries that you do. I really do. And I love the acoustic stuff as well. Maybe we'll touch on the Lost Scale first. Some stuff in there I wasn't aware of, David. Tell us why you put the Lost Scale together and how you came across that, I guess.
Well, the Lost Scale was a bit of an accident. One day it came into my consciousness that the Great Pyramid of Egypt was a giant crystal oscillator. And oscillators are used to generate frequencies, to give us different frequencies to transmit radio signals and telecommunications, etc. So, you talk on a certain frequency. If you turn your FM radio is frequency modulated band, where you take a certain frequency and you modulate the human voice or the music onto that particular frequency. And AM is amplitude modulation. Amplitude is the peak of a wave, and the frequency is how many waves per second. But it's all generated by, quartz crystals. And when you look at, the way crystal oscillators were made in the early days, it was just a slab of quartz and two pieces of metal on either side to stimulate and excite the electrons in the quartz to generate frequencies. And so I thought, the pyramid is made the way you would make a transistor or an oscillator. And transistors were actually invented in 1947, the same year as the Roswell incident. They were invented by John Bardeen, William Bratton, and William Shockley, these three scientists. And a lot of people think it was reverse engineered out of Roswell, but it really wasn't. It was mostly a revelation that was occurring in consciousness in the scientific community at that time. And the way ideas come in is definitely beyond Earth. It's definitely beyond Earth, insight. So I had this insight that the pyramid was a crystal oscillator because it was made with 3 layers of semiconductive material, radioactive granite in the core, and 2 different types of limestone on the skin. And when you make a crystal oscillator, you have layers. You have quartz, conductor, quartz. When you make a transistor, which amplifies signals and acts as a gate for signals, a transistor is layered with, again, semiconductive means. A semiconductor means basically, crystals actually have these little holes in them. They're little vortex holes called semiconductor holes. And the semiconductor hole is like a vortex that allows electrons to float up onto the surface of the crystal. And these electrons are unbound. In a way, it's a form of free energy, because when an electron isn't bound in the nucleus of an atom, it's free. You just have to grab it. And these scientists, said, wow, we can use this as an amplifier instead of the old gas tube amplifiers that they were using in stereos and radios in the old days. So when the transistor was finally figured out, it's quite an amazing journey, the story. It first only worked in water, and to get it to work without water was quite difficult. But this tiny little slab of quartz and metal changed the entire world. It allowed us to have these computers. It allowed us to have the internet. It allowed us to have millions of different colors in your computer screen. And so the transistor and the pyramid are so similar, and so in the way that they're layered, just like a crystal oscillator generates frequencies, and a transistor amplifies frequencies and signals, and they're very, very similar.
Wow.
So when I did the math on the Great Pyramid, the way it works is let's say this is a crystal oscillator. This would be a huge one, because today's crystal oscillators are so small, they print them, you can't even see them. They're microscopic.
Sure.
Like today's an Intel computer chip today has about 4 billion transistors in it. In a single Intel computer chip, there's 4 billion transistors.
Wow.
So you can't imagine that there's 4 billion pieces of electronics in one Intel chip. You can't even see that stuff. You need a good microscope. So the idea is that if I charge this quartz pyramid with a charge plate, it's going to excite the electrons in it to spin and oscillate and spin around the surface. And just above the electrons move at less than the speed of light as they're circulating, because they're inside of a solid, matrix form. But the electromagnetic signal, which is speed of light, oscillates at the speed of light, just above the surface, just a hair's breadth above the surface. So the way the math works is pretty simple. You just take the speed of light divided by the square wave wavelength of the pyramid. And I did that math all the way up the sides, and I did it in the subterranean pyramid. And when I get to the capstone base, the capstone of the Great Pyramid base, I actually have the formula in front of me, but I take the speed of light in Egyptian inches, which is almost the same as our inch.
Yeah.
So I want really fine resolution as my speed of light. And I take the perimeter distance around the capstone of the Great Pyramid, and you just take the speed of light divided by that until you get your frequency. And the number that I got was 5.151 megahertz squared, 5151. And I went, oh my God, that's the slope angle of the pyramid.
That's the same as the angle, yeah.
Yeah, and that would mean the builder would have had to know the speed of light as accurately as we do today. And in Einstein's time, they didn't even know it to perfection, the perfection we know it today.
They didn't know how to calculate it even.
You couldn't figure it out in ancient times. The 1970s is when we really, really isolated it down to what is known as the speed of light.
Wasn't there?
So that means
they did it. Yeah. They did it just for the audience. They did an experiment where they shone a beam of light or a laser on one mountain to another mountain, and they had an octagonal mirror spinning, and they were able to catch the reflected beam back again, and the distance calculated plus the speed of the rotating octagonal mirror. It was a complicated setup, but that was the best accuracy we got, and that was relatively recent.
Right. It gets more amazing because you see the pyramid capstone, you slice off the top, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the builder would have to have known the exact height to slice the top off so that the wavelength of that height would produce the same frequency as the slope angle.
Wow.
Which means that it's mathematical proof that I discovered that the builder knew the speed of light. But then I started to see a pattern from the base of the pyramid all the way up that kept recycling of these numbers, these mystical numbers. And I decided to test them to see if there was a music scale here that was ancient. Because, you see, there's this whole theory, this conspiracy theory that the modern music scale was mutated intentionally so that we would all be slightly out of tune. And then there's the solfeggio music scale. So I'll show you how to do this. The way you do this is you just download a tone generator software. And for Mac, you can use Black Hat Systems Audio Toolbox, and it's only $20, right?
Okay.
And it gives you all these channels, and you just, for testing audio, you use sine wave, which is a curvature wave, and you enter your frequencies. So I did this for the modern, what's known as the classical music scale today. The chromatic music scale has 12 tones, and it has 8 to 10 octaves that you actually can listen to in the music scale. And when you start, you start at the bottom, A 440 hertz, and you go up, and you don't turn off each tone. You see how much distortion there is in between tone 1, tone 2, and tone 3. Mm-hmm. So you imagine that's your spine, that's your kundalini, right? And if the tones are perfect for each chakra, and there's actually 10 chakras truly, then there will be very little wobbling between the tones. But with our music scale, it wobbles quite a bit. You can hear it when you go to my video, The Lost Scale Extended on Vimeo, and you'll hear this. And so when you go to solfeggio, the famous solfege, which is not a full scale, it's actually 9 tones, it's so much better. But then about the 5th note up, it starts to really distort. Mm. So you say, where's the perfect scale? Where is it hidden? And I was reading this book called Jesus the Master Builder, which is all about Jesus going to Ireland and England, and actually with
Joseph, uncle.
His uncle Joseph. And in it, I was, I've already been aware of this, the kithara, the early Greek instruments, were the earliest forms of musical playing stringed instruments that we know of, that the Pythagorean theorem and Pythagorean mathematics led to the birth of these instruments. The Greeks had a number, not like today's numerology, but they had a numerical value for every word and every letter in their alphabet in the ancient Greek system, not the modern Greek system.
Gematria.
And the number of the gematria for the kithara is 5-1. And when I saw that, I said, this is a music scale. This is probably the real Pythagorean C was 515.1. And it's not what they tell us it is today. So when I realized that, and I did the math from the subterranean pyramid all the way to the top, I found a 10-tone scale that was flawless. And I put the 10 numbers in the tone generator, and you leave it on and you go all the way up, and you'll hear this at the end of the video.
Mm-hmm.
And they just melt into each other like butter with very little distortion. So beautiful.
Beautiful. It sounds
They
beautiful.
sound, yeah.
I love the way you demonstrated it, David. You just demonstrated it so well in the video. It's like the graphics, the presentation, and the demonstration of the audio of what you're talking about is awesome. It beggars belief that, or what we think is beautiful music today is really disharmonious to an extent, to some extent anyway. And
just to some extent, because I'll tell you, this will shock you a little bit. But first I went to whole tones, James Tyrrell's whole tones, and he's got frequencies that are based on the solfeggio, but they're not solfeggio.
Mm-hmm.
And I tone tested those, and they were like this. They were really wobbling. They were totally distorted. And then there's this whole cult around 432ism. And 432ism is based on this idea that the square root of the speed of light is 432. And it's actually 431.6. And the decimal just keeps going.
Yeah.
And you see, in mathematics, there's only two numbers that, regardless of whether you're an alien or a human, and you use this much distance for a foot or this much, you always get the same number. And frequency and ratio are universal. They would exist anywhere in the universe. So
True.
If I take 9 centimeters, which is a 10-base system, and divide it into 10, or 10 divided by 9, it's a ratio of 1 to 1. Now, if I convert online, you can do this, 9 centimeters and 10 centimeters into feet and inches. What's that noise?
Don't know. It's not at my end anyway.
It sounded like a motorcycle. Anyway, it's interesting we're talking about disharmonics. That guy comes along. So anyway, so they remain the same. If you convert the metric into feet and inches, the ratio is still 1 to 1. And if I use Greek feet or, Roman, it wouldn't matter. I've actually done this with my calculator.
Very good point, David. Very good point. Frequency and ratio, the universal. It's a universal way of expressing. And isn't that what the Mayans did as well? Rather than use fractions, they used the ratio as well. It was a better way of doing it. They didn't have the decimal point. You can eliminate decimal points by using ratios as well.
Right. Ratio is so perfect, and ratio is everything when it comes to musical scales. So now it gets even more stunning, because I have 10 tones, but I don't have a full music scale, because to have a music scale you need an octave, right? And our octave today is ×2. It's pretty primitive. You go, why did these early musicians just go, okay, the next octave up from 440 is 880? I mean, that's just crazy. There can't possibly be a harmonic reason for using ×2 for all your frequencies. So I decided that if 5.1 is where C should really be, where did it come from? How did you get the pyramid angle? And the way you do it is you draw a golden rectangle. You take side A times 1.61803398887 for side B, and you get your rectangle. And normally what you do with a golden rectangle is you golden rectangle off each corner, and you connect the dots, and you get this Fibonacci spiral. But if you cut it in half, which nobody's ever done, except for if you study, Archimedeism and things like that, and you draw a pyramid on a golden rectangle, guess what your slope angle is? 51 degrees and 51 minutes. Pyramid angle. So the pyramid angle is half of a golden rectangle's, the slope. So that means that most likely it makes the most sense to use the golden ratio as an octave. And when I use the golden ratio of an octave and I go up to the next octave 10 tones, they don't distort once again. And I go up another one and another one, another one, and they always remained perfect with my 10 bass tones. So then I realized I have an entire scale here. It turns out I have 120 tones times 3 scales in the pyramid math, if you can believe that. So there's 360 tones, as there are 360 degrees in a circle, and none of them distort. There's never been anything like this. So Jesus, in the Master Builder, must have known this. He must have known this math going to England and going to Ireland and studying the great ancient sites. Because for one, Stonehenge is sitting at 51 degrees and 1 minute north latitude.
We're just coming up to break, so just for the webpage, you can go to capricornradio.com for the free archives and capricornmembers.com for the HD TV and MP3 archives. But for now, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host, James, and don't forget to check out the archives at capricornmembers.com. You can subscribe for membership, doing a lifetime membership deal at the moment. And of course, you can still check out the free archives at capricornradio.com. And then HDTV shows as well on the Capricorn members page. But for now...
And also Jesus taught in the Gospel of the Egyptians these tones that you would tone to activate your light body. You can read about it in the Gospel of the Egyptians. He says there's 7 tones timed that are in tone 22 times each, and 22 divided by 7 is pi.
Wow.
You know, so that's Egyptian pi, actually. So it's very clear to me that if Jesus was using a tonal scale to turn on the light body, this is one of the earliest pieces of evidence that there was a technique that Jesus actually used. So what, you know, my wife, Crystal, has a background in opera singing and jazz singing and studied with some very good teachers and has an amazing singing voice. And so what she started doing with me is when you hear a tone, you adjust your voice and your mouth to match that tone. And when you match it with your voice, you hear this pulsing, this shimmering inside of you. And so people who take the Quantum Regenesis course are doing this, and phenomenal experiences, phenomenal. I mean, I've noticed, you know, just in my 35 years of meditating and studying with so many different gurus and teachers and so many different breathing techniques, that I'm now able to go into much super bliss states much faster. Like in 20 minutes of meditating, I'm more at nighttime when my kids go to sleep. Mm-hmm. I'm already reaching really high frequency bliss. I mean, my whole body and being is and then I stretch my legs, do some Buddhist walking, and then I do another 20 minutes, and it's mind blowing. So the more you resonate your bio strings, what Pythagoras called the musica humana, the human musical instrument, the more you're going to start vibrating. And if they're the right tones that you're toning to, and with distortion, when you hear the wobbling between the tones, it's the waves crashing into each other. So it's knocking the Kundalini down. But it's not terrible. I can't say that our music scale is terrible. I can say there are some New Age scales out there. There's even this other one around 432 that I tested is awful. I mean, it distorts way worse than our modern music scale. So there's a lot of people playing around with. Now, there are certain single frequencies that have a certain quality to them, but they don't belong in a scale. Mm-hmm. A scale is how you move energy up, how you get it to ascend. It's like stairs. A single point frequency like 432, it can't do that because it's not a scale. But it may have a quality to it. I mean, there's people who say that they really feel something with 432, and if you feel something, then something's happening.
Sure.
But it's not. I could turn 432 into a perfect scale because I know the code. I know how to do the multiples of it and make it perfect.
Wow. It's such an interesting subject, and I know what you do is you show the math, the energy, and the music's all related to each other. It's all the same. It's just how you design and manipulate and maneuver it. And Deb, I want to switch gears for a moment. I'm going to mention the Vortex now, but before we get into that, and it will kind of lead into it, tell me about your UFO experience in your younger days, and kind of then how that became into the UFO enthusiasm. And then we can bring in the Vortex movie, because that kind of leads into that then.
Well, I grew up, I was born in Canada, in Alberta, Canada, in 1961. So I'm an early 60s baby. And my dad decided to move us all, 4 boys and my mom, to Berkeley, California in about 64. And he was studying psychology down there and he got his PhD in psychology at UC Berkeley. And in those days, there were, the riots and the tear gas. I mean, we were in the middle of it. My mom would hide us under the park benches and try to protect our eyes from the tear gas. But the tear gas burned your eyes so bad as a kid, we couldn't open our eyes. So my mom would hold our hands and run us through to get us out of there. And I'm really deeply influenced by the 60s, the Kennedy assassinations, both Kennedys, and where the world could have been had we been more awakened to accept and make the right choices for ourselves as a nation and as a world, because that consciousness rippled out through the entire world. And I really think there was a reason the ETs were there. But one day, walking home from school, this would have been about 68, so it's several years later, I had built model airplanes as a kid. I looked at Goodyear blimps, so I knew what aircraft. I knew how to differentiate between different types of aircraft, even at 7 years old. And one day, there's a flying saucer hovering right above, near the Cornell Elementary School, which is still there today. That school is still there where I went as a kid. And I noticed everyone's freaking out. They're knocking on neighbors' doors, coming out, saying, "Come out here and look at this thing." And, this is 1968. This is a flying saucer down low. Everyone could see it, no markings, perfect shimmering metallic color that I think I know the type of metal that they had, the skin was made out of. It was most likely a tungsten alloy, but tungsten has phenomenal properties. So anyway, after about 20 minutes of watching it, and my friend and I saying, it's the Starship Enterprise, and we were trying to see, is it the Starship Enterprise? Could you see that little extra, the 2 wings and no, we couldn't see that. And I go home, I tell my mom, she doesn't say anything. And in those days, we watched Star Trek, and My Favorite Martian, I think, was starting up. And I started watching My Favorite Martian, and I didn't really have anyone to talk to about it, because in the following days, my mom was in the middle of divorcing my dad because the 60s were too wild for her, and he was into a lot of, fun stuff. And she married a science teacher named David Cooper, and we moved to this new house in the Berkeley Hills. And in that house in the Berkeley Hills on Glenwood Glade, I was being contacted every night by them. My body would get paralyzed, and they weren't grays. They were very much like us, much taller, blonde-haired, blue-eyed beings. And I remember they wore white, and they were telling me how their spaceship worked. They showed me the Pleiades star system. They don't name it that. They didn't even give me, at that age, a name. And they were showing me these counter-rotating magnetic fields inside the center of the craft and these multicolored lights. And I'm 7 years old, and they're showing me all this. And then this went on. I didn't just have one experience. I mean, one time my mom and Dave Cooper went out on a date, and there was a babysitter watching us, and I was paralyzed. And I went into a state of shock because I couldn't get back in my body. And I eventually got in my body and let out a huge scream, and she came running down. And so they had the ability to superimpose some kind of field over our nervous system to transmit pictures and images and learning. But I had no one to really talk to about it. And then it wasn't until we moved back to Canada, my mom divorced him, sent us back to our real dad in Vancouver. And on a TV show in Vancouver, Canada in the 1970s, like 73 or 4, there was a Billy Meyer, a special on the Billy Meyer, and I said, oh my God, that's what I saw. I saw that craft. And then it all started making sense. And I kept replaying the experience in my head over and over and over again, but there's still no ufology. There's nothing for me to connect it to. And my dad got us into yoga and meditation and hanging out with different gurus from India, and it was really all about going into higher states of consciousness. So I grew up with that, and it wasn't for a long time that I realized that there's this whole phenomenal movement around ufology.
Wow. Before I jump into propulsions then and vortex energy, David, do you want to jump in, Susan?
Sure. Thank you, David. I think it's important as you make the connection, or rather, as you're speaking about the different connections between your interest in, over unity, free energy, new energy, whatever, we want to describe, and, looking at our past to maybe understand where we're going in the future, and the fact that you bring in the interdimensional or extra dimensional, ET component, I think is really important, because to me, it's about this whole thing fitting together, and it's not, just all these separate pieces. So I thank you for that. As you've gotten a chance to, process these different experiences and maybe understand, what they're all about, I think maybe the one question that I have is, what do you feel that these beings are in relation to you?
Well, I wouldn't get the answer to that until I decided that the Great Pyramid Plateau was a ratio of crystal oscillator relationship to, it wasn't just a star map like, Graham Hancock and Bivol were saying, but they were resonant oscillators to build up a resonance in the pattern of a star system to open up a stargate. So I made a miniature one in the ratio of Pleiades. And I did a recording we had a recording of my wife singing this Frank Sinatra song, Fly Me to the Moon. I thought that would be a good song to send out to the Pleiades. And I sent it out through a Pleiadian harmonic, and I thought, what's going to happen? And that night, we were living in Sedona. We lived there for 6 years, and my daughter wasn't born yet, my first daughter. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, I hear this audible voice. It's not like when you hear your mind having an insight voice. This is audible. I can hear it. Wow. And it's the most gentle, mellow male voice saying, congratulations, we received your message. Now what do you want to ask us? And I leaped out of bed and I went, oh my God, they heard us. It works. This is, see, ratio, as we were talking earlier, and frequency. Every star has its own frequency because they all have different sizes. So if you take the circumference of Earth in metric or in feet or in Greek feet, and you divide it into the speed of light of that mass system, you always get the same number, which is about 7.45 hertz-ish at the equator. Where Tesla measured it, 7.83. It's a whole other thing, because with a sphere, you get an averaging of frequencies throughout a band of electrons spinning throughout a sphere.
It's like an obloid. It's squashed at the poles. So.
Right, it's squished at the poles. So you get the mass is anyway. So you can calculate your frequencies that way. But because every star and every planet's a different size, they're all different frequencies. Just like different stations on your AM and FM dial, they don't run into each other, right? You don't hear it all at once. If you tune to a specific frequency, you get everything happening at that frequency. So if you tune in to the Pleiadian frequencies and their ratios, then you don't get anybody else. And what's amazing is human DNA and plant DNA was proven by a German physicist named Fritz Albert Popp to transmit signals faster than the speed of light. And through a quantum function, it's actually almost instantaneous, because the Pleiades are very far away, 440 something light years away.
Yeah.
So it worked. And I went, oh my God, I wrote down all these questions because I'm going to answer you, Susan. I said, where have you been all my life? And I did a recording of all my questions to them, and I sent it out, and nothing happened the first night. And I thought, oh, well, this isn't going to work. And night two was literally a massive, massive experience. It was literally, I felt so transparent. It was like there was a spaceship over our house, and I had meetings with these two Pleiadian women that were not blondes. They were much shorter than traditional Pleiadians, with brown hair, and their hair was done up with this, little tie, and they had clipboards, and they knew everything about my life, and they were going through the checklist on my life. And I said, "You guys actually do this? You know my whole life?" And I said, "Why did you disappear on me my whole life?" And now I'm like 50, and you're actually discovered this when I was 51. I'm 54 now. And I said, where were you guys? So she's telling me all these things. And I have this all on my website, all my Pleiadian experiences, because I did this numerous times over the years. And I made contact, and she answered me. She said that our ships used to come much closer, but because the human race developed very advanced beam weapons and magnetic weapons, they've been able to take down their craft. And they had to find a way. They said they were exploring Spica. I'd never heard of the star Spica. And they said, we found super water there. And she showed me a glass of super water, one of them, with these little multicolored lights in them, like Fruit Loops, and they were spinning around in the water. And she said when we started drinking super water, we could quantum leap with our bodies. So we could leave our ships parked far away, and we could just beam in and beam out with our bodies, and they would go unnoticed. And they wouldn't be attacked. But basically, they have been living in the mountains. And with their technology, with lasers, they can carve whole, giant homes and buildings for themselves inside of mountain sites. And we don't even know they're there. Our mountains
on Earth. So what I'm hearing you say is that, because sometimes people, I guess maybe that don't have the contact experience, think that these beings are so much more advanced than us, and they are too. They are, yes, but also that they have evolution as well. So what goes on here on Earth with the development of new technologies for different reasons is also impacting and affecting them, which is causing them to make some shifts in how they do what they do in order to keep that line of communication open with us.
Exactly. I mean, they have the ability to leave, but we don't. Apparently we don't. I mean, unless you get into the secret space program idea, which is, I really believe is happening. So they have the ability to leave, whereas most of us are trapped here, and we couldn't escape, our own iconoclasm or destruction. So that's, and they've been doing this for over 1,000 years. And they can come and go at will. But of course, when you have flying saucer technology, you can go land in a flower meadow in the top of a mountainside and enjoy that and drink fresh water of a stream. And you hear stories of UFOs hovering above the lakes and sucking up some water. Yes. So they can do whatever they want, and they can grow inside of a mountain with hydroponics. And so and it's funny because our sun is over 4.5 billion years old, and the Pleiadian stars are less than 1 billion, like 700 million. And so they're hotter. They're hotter than our sun.
That's why they're blue. And like a blue tinge because they're hotter.
Right. They have more. Our sun has more green light than any other color. A NASA scientist told me. So we're it's not that humans are all not evolved. There's a lot of Pleiadians that they enjoy their lives. They're like gods and goddesses because their DNA lives way longer than ours because it's much younger, much fresher. Our bodies are made of stuff that is billions of years old because our sun manufactured the dust and all the elements on the periodic table with which our bodies are made out of. So we're older than we think. These physical bodies have all of the data and information of our sun because it's all sun dust that is over 4.5 billion year old dust that we're made out of. And that's pretty amazing to think about because Pleiadians are made out of, 700 million year old dust. So now the temperature issue is amazing because NASA says everything has to be at this temperature. And we know, even in Catholic mysticism, there's stories of priests walking into a furnace and their robe doesn't even get burned. I mean, there's good documentation of this. So when you change frequency, you can exist in higher temperature environments. I mean, a temperature that causes a cell structure to burn is actually a differential. So if you're already high temperature, then you have to go even hotter to cause that high temperature thing to burn.
Wow.
And it's all done by adjusting the rate of the electron inside of every single atom. So NASA keeps saying, there's nobody else in the universe that has the exact temperature region that we have, so nothing else could possibly exist except for these few planets they found. And they say, well, Pleiades, it's too hot, so there couldn't be anybody there. And that's just not true, because, I mean, you can even see this in ancient depictions in the artwork of the visitors having these very radiant bodies.
Glowing,
are glowing because they're in a higher temperature. I mean, we're actually glowing. If you take a pair of infrared goggles and point it at somebody's heart, it'll blind you. I've done this outside, and you go, oh my God, like you can't look at the light that's coming out of somebody's heart. And that's actual light. It's infrared light. And so we are emitting this light all the time, but there are certain beings whose stars are hotter than ours, so they would appear brighter than us. And there are certain beings whose stars are cooler than ours, which means they would be, they would be colder in temperature than us. So, and I had an experience like this recently where I had, my daughter had the same experience at 4 years old right here, that when the Pleiadians land, their ships are hovering above the lake outside, they have to cool off first. And she told me that.
Wow.
4 years old.
David, I've got 15 minutes left, and I want to get into some of the Vortex energy documentary.
Mm-hmm.
In the start of that, you did a little recap on the NASA footage, the 12-mile tethered satellite, and the spinning discs. I remember seeing this in a few presentations that you've had. I think your analysis on that as well, and how you could actually measure the diameter of them to be about, I think it was a mile or something, because they pass behind the other object, and you can see the spin ratio and the spiral energy. I mean, you can actually freeze frame it, and you can even see there's like a little notch in it. Let's talk about those objects first and foremost, and then we'll come into some of the Vortex energy documentary.
Well, when the space shuttle was conducting this tethered satellite experiment, I think it was 1997, although I'm just going on the top of my head, it was STS-75. When the shuttle was passing right over Northwest Africa and then over Egypt, right over Egypt, and the pyramids, the cameras they're using on the space shuttle can see invisible ultraviolet light. So that's why they're black and white. They're very low light level sensitive cameras that are sensitive to optical wavelengths above the range where humans see from red to the color violet. We don't see ultraviolet near, far, and extreme. And I verified that with NASA. And you can see that this tethered experiment basically went awry. Something went wrong where the tether broke away from the space shuttle, and it drifted. It was orbiting at a different rate than the shuttle around the Earth. And there was this one news channel that reported that a lot of the instruments aboard the satellite that was controlling the tether, where the buttons were being pushed and the nitrogen fuel tank was emptied, and the nitrogen, which is what gives us the glow around the Earth, the oxygen and the nitrogen, surrounded the tethered satellite. And so the tether is this thin cable. You couldn't see it from 10 or 12 miles away, right? So NASA's looking at it, and what they're seeing is this neon tube. And the neon tube effect is about a quarter to a half a mile thick. And the reason it's there is the sunlight is bouncing off of the ionized gases. Mm-hmm. And so you got this neon tube that's 12 miles long, and then you see all these lights come in, and they're pulsing and strobing and moving around. And some of them go behind it. And because they go behind it, they have to be, if you have a ruler that's 12, inches long, and something goes behind it, then you could say, relative to that ruler, it's at least that diameter. Yeah. But if it's further behind the tether than we think it is, then the objects are even bigger than I think they are. But if it was in front of the tether, then you could create an optical illusion and you wouldn't really know how big they are. But they clearly go behind it, and they're pulsing, and they're pulsing, and they're pulsing. And when you slow down the pulses, you can see the black hole in the middle and this Fibonacci spiral coming out of the middle. And right when we made that revelation that was what was actually happening, we knew the cameras were in focus. When a digital camera is in focus, it has phenomenal depth of field. So you don't get this argument that NASA said that it's a out of focus airy disk, because the depth of field is phenomenal. And if the camera was out of focus, you wouldn't see the perfect vortex coming out of the middle. Mm-hmm. And the History Channel Ancient Alien guys tried to say that it's not real, it's all an optical illusion, but they omitted the fact that you could see the vortex with perfect clarity. So they were definitely wrong in their analysis. Mm-hmm. So what that means is there's something happening in these UFOs that are probably at least 1.5 miles to 2 miles wide that are using and utilizing vortex energy. But right at that particular time in my life, I had an experience with Christ in 1994, blinding like 1,000 suns. And within days after seeing Christ this first time, I could see spirits. I could see the dead. I could see star beings with my eyes open, usually at night, with perfect clarity, not blurry. I mean, I could count the stitching and date the time period when those stitches existed on the earth at some of the fabrics of some of the deceased humans that I have been visited by. And so what actually starts happening, it gets more and more and more fascinating, is eventually one night I was living in my yurt in Topanga Canyon, where this experience with Christ occurred on my dad's ranch, for part of the year. And I was tree planting in Canada the rest of the year. And one night I wake up and there's these 3 balls of light about 2 feet wide. And they're right in front of me. And one is pinkish fuchsia, one is pearly white, and one is like a bluish indigo. And they're making jokes, and they're speaking English, and they look at me, and they're bouncing around, and they told me we're Arcturians. And I'm like, I don't know what an Arcturian is. I didn't even know there was a star called Arcturus. And I said, you guys better go. You're making me nervous with all your jokes. And I'm scared. I'm really seeing this. This isn't an illusion. I can slap myself, and I'm awake. And my yurt had 10-foot ceilings. It was huge. So they were floating around. So they decided to leave, and then I asked a bunch of New Age friends, have you ever heard of an Arcturian? And nobody knew. And finally, I was pointed to a book called We the Arcturians by Norma Milanovich, and sure enough, she mentions those same 3 colors. Now, what's amazing is eventually when the crop circles started appearing, you would see these balls of light that have been filmed that make the circles. Mm-hmm. And many people have said it's the Arcturians who are making the circles, and they're the circle makers. And then when the STS-75 incident occurred, the particular date, which I have in the video, right across from Stonehenge, England, and Stonehenge, England is sitting at 51 degrees and 1 minute north latitude, there was this vortex crop circle pattern with the same degree of curvature of spiral as the NASA UFO. And it had the black hole, the hole in the middle circle, and all the other circles, satellites going around it. See, a spiral can have a slight curve, a steeper curve, an even steeper curve. When you superimpose them, they're the same degree of curvature, the NASA UFO spiral, which is even more evidence that there's a connection. And as for the balls of light that I saw that day, and I've seen them again since, they've been filmed in the crop circles for years, following the date. I think that experience was around 1997. It's a long time ago.
Wow. Still, for me, David, it's got to be some of the most fascinating footage I've ever seen. Not just the footage, but the on-scene analysis by yourself on that as well. Susan, do you want to jump in for a question before you go?
So it's slightly related to it, but it's a burning question that I have because I've seen some of your work, and the level of detail and understanding about crystals, the megalith sites, the different beings, and also like our human species, maybe how long that we've been on the planet, and the modern human as well. So, there's so much that's, moving and going through. One of the questions that I'd have for you is, what do you think it's going to take in order for humanity as a whole to have over unity? And I'm talking about like powering houses and, maybe running our cars, as we get hopefully off of some of these other devices, maybe that are not so beneficial for Earth as a whole, and maybe more into the natural dynamics. In your wealth of experience that you have, what do you think it's actually going to take in order for us to get there?
I'll tell you, it's going to be a funny answer. What it's going to take, you see, remember, it took 3 guys to invent the transistor, and I think there are men and women Einstein gave his wife cooperative credit for the discovery of the theory of relativity, and that was published in scientific journals. I really think it's going to take a team of men and women who are all receiving these visions and downloads to work together to get out of this idea that I'm going to save the world all by myself. You see, John Bardeen, Will Bratton, and Will Shockley had to work together to figure out the transistor, and it changed the world. No one can do it with one mind. And I believe all the insights I have about vortex energy and coils, and there's numerous other incredible people out there. Mm-hmm. And most of the people I know who with incredible minds, guys like Steve Okerlund, who and many, many great thinkers, have no money, or they're struggling with just getting by in their personal life. And you need to get to this point where you're funded and you don't have to think about all this other stuff. You apply your mind, because the universe has already given us the information on how to build a real zero-point energy technology. It's just the reason we can't do it is we're trying to survive. And I know Nassim Harriman was given a huge amount of money and many millions, but he hasn't actually built a zero-point energy device yet, because I don't think he has the whole thing. And I think he has some insights, but he has more money given to him than anybody in this entire movement. So you basically need to distribute that and put everyone together in a think meditative space. And I think we need the feminine mind in there as much as the masculine mind. And we need to, build it together. There are many of us that have part of the secret. I believe I have a lot of the secret. I can say I believe I can do it on my own if I was funded, a couple 100,000 even. But I've seen historically how these great inventions occur, and it's never one person. One person didn't build the rockets that sent astronauts into space. It was never done by one person. Nothing, telescopes are not done by one person. And my idea on my technology for using a harmonic to communicate with distant star systems, I've had contact with Sirius, Pleiades, Spica. I didn't even know Spica was a star. I looked it up after my experience with the Pleiades, and sure enough, there's a star in Virgo called Spica. For me, I had no prior knowledge that was a name for a star, so I knew that I wasn't just having an illusionary experience where they're just giving me a name of a star that's something that doesn't exist in the realm of our ability to see. So when I knew, and that happened a lot, just like with Arcturus, I never knew there was a star called Arcturus. I wasn't an astronomer. I was a Buddhist meditator, and then I meet Christ, and then suddenly I can see beings with my eyes open. For 14 years, I saw them all the time, and then I saw my little daughter, Adira, before she was born. I saw her before she was born when everyone said it's a boy. There's a little girl beside the bed laughing, and then I have a girl. So I know that my experiences are not illusions too, because I had a girl. I saw a girl beside the bed. We didn't have a boy. And so that when you the more you trust your experience, and then the Pleiadians have given me very clear instructions on how the anti-gravity part of it works. See, it's very tricky with zero-point energy. You see, everyone wants to convert the energy in their zero-point device back into the way we use electricity. But you see, we use electricity to move things around, like an electric car moves a body around, right? Mm. And the car is heavy, and Tesla Motors wants to turn the crankshaft. Clumsy. But as soon as you make your car as light as a feather by canceling out gravity and the inertial forces, how much energy does it take to move? Mm. To move a feather around? Nothing. So you don't need this. You use all your energy to reduce the forces of gravity and inertia, and then you use a tiny amount of energy to move it all around. Wow. Like how much energy does it take to move a spaceship that is reduced to zero mass, as light as a piece of light, right? A photon. It doesn't take any energy at all to move photons around. And then to go faster than the speed of light doesn't take any energy either. All the energy in zero-point energy needs to be applied to reducing the weight charge and the inertial forces. And a lot of zero-point energy scientists are not doing that. Their approach is, let's build a motor that we can run an electric car with. And that's the wrong approach, because zero-point energy doesn't even work like that. Because people will see these huge increases of energy in their coils, and then they just can't bring it back down and use it the way we use power today. So that's a huge part of the problem.
David, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you for that. That's a wonderful answer. Please give us out the website where people can find out all about you, and obviously the two names of the documentary we've been talking about today. They're awesome, by the way. I really commend you on them.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, my website is davidsorita.net. You can see my quantum regenesis meditation course. Year 1 is all on flash drive right now with 26 weekly lessons there. David Sereda, SEREDA.net. And my video, The Vortex, which we've been talking about, you really have to see, because this 5151 harmonics you're going to see in the video is everywhere, including Area 51 and how Area 51 got its name. You got to see the film. You'll see my Great Pyramid Angle Vortex coils in there. This is a primitive one of the first ones I built using the angle, the slope angle of the Great Pyramid. I wind my coils at that sacred angle, and this is. I also have these new pulsed massage chairs coming out. It's a device that you can put into any chair, and you connect it to an amplifier, and you can. I have hundreds of different harmonic frequencies I've designed that you can pulse your body with and get a NASA Sound of the Sun massage, a Palladian massage, whatever kind of massage you want. So
here we go. David, you got an awesome mind. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Susan, it's been a pleasure talking to you too. We're at the top of the hour, guys. davidsereda.net for today's guest. I thank you for your time again, David. We'll speak to you not too distant future, and best of luck with the new baby.
A music scale here that was ancient, because you see, there's this whole theory, this conspiracy theory, that the modern music scale was mutated intentionally so that we would all be slightly out of tune. And then there's the solfeggio music scale. So I'll show you how to do this. The way you do this is you just download a tone generator software. And for Mac, you can use Black Hat Systems Audio Toolbox, and it's only $20, right?
Okay.
And it gives you all these channels. And you just, for testing audio, you use sine wave, which is a curvature wave, and you enter your frequencies. So I did this for the modern, what's known as the classical music scale today. The chromatic music scale has 12 tones, and it has, 8 to 10 octaves that you actually can listen to in the music scale. And when you start, you start at the bottom, A 440 hertz, and you go up, and you don't turn off each tone. You see how much distortion there is in between tone 1, tone 2, and tone 3. So you imagine that's your spine, that's your kundalini, right? And if the tones are perfect for each chakra, and there's actually 10 chakras truly, then there will be very little wobbling between the tones. But with our music scale, it wobbles quite a bit. You can hear it when you go to my video, The Lost Scale extended on Vimeo, and you'll hear this. And so when you go to solfeggio, the famous solfege, which is not a full scale, it's actually 9 tones, it's so much better. But then about the 5th note up, it starts to really distort. So you say, where's the perfect scale? Where is it hidden? And I was reading this book called Jesus Egyptian Inches, which is almost the same as our inch.
Yeah.
So I want really fine resolution as my speed of light. And I take the perimeter distance around the capstone of the Great Pyramid, and you just take the speed of light divided by that until you get your frequency. And the number that I got was 5.151 megahertz squared, 5151. And I went, oh my God, that's the slope angle of the pyramid.
That's the same as the angle, yeah.
Yeah, and that would mean the builder would have had to know the speed of light as accurately as we do today. And in Einstein's time, they didn't even know it to perfection, the perfection we know it today.
Didn't know how to calculate it even.
You couldn't figure it out in ancient times. The 1970s is when we really, really isolated it down to what is known as the speed of light.
Wasn't there?
So that means
they did it. Yeah. They did it just for the audience. They did an experiment where they shone a beam of light or a laser on one mountain to another mountain, and they had an octagonal mirror spinning, and they were able to catch the reflected beam back again, and the distance calculated plus the speed of the rotating octagonal mirror. It was a complicated setup, but that was the best accuracy we got, and that was relatively recent. Like.
Right. It gets more amazing because you see the pyramid capstone, you slice off the top, right?
Mm.
So the builder would have to have known the exact height to slice the top off so that the wavelength of that height would produce the same frequency as the slope angle.
Wow.
Which means that it's mathematical proof that I discovered that the builder knew the speed of light. But then I started to see a pattern from the base of the pyramid all the way up that kept recycling of these numbers, these mystical numbers. And I decided to test them to see if there was the Roswell incident. They were invented by John Bardeen, William Bratton, and William Shockley, these three scientists. And a lot of people think it was reverse engineered out of Roswell, but it really wasn't. It was mostly a revelation that was occurring in consciousness in the scientific community at that time. And the way ideas come in is definitely beyond Earth. It's definitely beyond Earth, insight. So I had this insight that the pyramid was a crystal oscillator because it was made with 3 layers of semiconductive material, radioactive granite in the core, and 2 different types of limestone on the skin. And when you make a crystal oscillator, you have layers. You have quartz, conductor, quartz. When you make a transistor, which amplifies signals and acts as a gate for signals, a transistor is layered with, again, semiconductor means, a semiconductor means basically, crystals actually have these little holes in them. They're little vortex holes called semiconductor holes. And the semiconductor hole is like a vortex that allows electrons to float up onto the surface of the crystal. And these electrons are unbound. In a way, it's a form of free energy because when an electron isn't bound in the nucleus of an atom, it's free. You just have to grab it. And these scientists, said, wow, we can use this as an amplifier instead of the old gas tube amplifiers that they were using in stereos and radios in the old days. Mm-hmm. So when the transistor was finally figured out, it's quite an amazing journey, the story. Mm-hmm. It first only worked in water, and to get it to work without water was quite difficult. But this tiny little slab of quartz and metal changed the entire world. It allowed us to have these computers. It allowed us to have the internet. It allowed us to have millions of different colors in your computer screen. And so the transistor and the pyramid are so similar, and so in the way that they're layered, just like so a crystal oscillator generates frequencies, and a transistor amplifies frequencies and signals, and they're very, very similar.
Wow.
So when I did the math on the Great Pyramid, the way it works is let's say this is a crystal oscillator. This would be a huge one, because today's crystal oscillators are so small, they print them, you can't even see them. They're microscopic.
Sure.
Like an Intel computer chip today has about 4 billion transistors in it. In a single Intel computer chip, there's 4 billion transistors.
Wow.
So you can't imagine that there's 4 billion pieces of electronics in one Intel chip. You can't even see that stuff. You need a good microscope. So the idea is that if I charge this quartz pyramid with a charge plate, it's going to excite the electrons in it to spin and oscillate and spin around the surface. And just above the electrons move at less than the speed of light as they're circulating, because they're inside of a solid, matrix form. But the electromagnetic signal, which is speed of light, oscillates at the speed of light, just above the surface, just a hair's breadth above the surface. So the way the math works is pretty simple. You just take the speed of light divided by the square wave wavelength of the pyramid. And I did that math all the way up the sides, and I did it in the subterranean pyramid. And when I get to the capstone base, the capstone of the Great Pyramid base, I actually have the formula in front of me, but I just take the speed of light in each.
We have this wonderful way of touching people around the world and videos, and I know what you provide on a documentary is a mixture of everything that you are, David. You've got everything in there, from the science and cutting edge stuff on ancient philosophy, ancient history, I love the presentations that you do. I love the documentaries that you do. I really do. And I love the acoustic stuff as well. I probably maybe we'll touch on the Lost Scale first. Some stuff in there I wasn't aware of, David. Tell us why you put the Lost Scale together and how you came across that, I guess.
Well, the Lost Scale was a bit of an accident. One day it came into my consciousness that the Great Pyramid of Egypt was a giant crystal oscillator. And oscillators are used to generate frequencies, to give us different frequencies to transmit radio signals and telecommunications, etc. So, you talk on a certain frequency. If you turn your FM radio is frequency modulated band, where you take a certain frequency and you modulate the human voice or the music onto that particular frequency. And AM is amplitude modulation. Amplitude is the peak of a wave, and the frequency is how many waves per second. But it's all generated by, quartz crystals. And when you look at, the way crystal oscillators were made in the early days, it was just a slab of quartz and two pieces of metal on either side to stimulate and excite the electrons in the quartz to generate frequencies. And so I thought, the pyramid is made the way you would make a transistor or an oscillator. And transistors were actually invented in 1947, the same year as